Welcome to the Robin's Nest. I want to get into a couple of topics today that I've been meaning to talk about on previous videos, but for whatever reason, time constraints, or just me forgetting, we haven't done it yet. So I want to do that today. So let's get into it. Make sure to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, leave a comment, share the video far and wide, tell everyone about our channel, because this is going to be a permanent thing moving forward. We're going to keep doing the compilation videos, but we're also going to do videos like this, and we're going to talk about a wide range of topics, all motorsport related, but it's not going to be pinned down to just one discipline. We're going to talk about all of them, from rally, trucks, NASCAR, to Brazilian stock cars, Formula One, the gambit. We're going to talk about all of it. So tell your friends, share, like, subscribe, the works, and I appreciate all your support. You guys are awesome. You guys and gals are awesome. And before I get started into what we're going to talk about today, I want to give a shout out. I meant to do this in previous video and forgot. But Brad Brown, John Enfinger, you guys are awesome. They are responsible for these pictures you see behind me of Layne rigs. Sent those to me right before Christmas. You guys are awesome. I really appreciate it. Pretty cool. I stuck one. They gave me some decals as well. I slapped 2 of those on the back of my wife's van, representing the big 38, which is pretty cool. So I made a post earlier about Layne being a favorite for next year in the Truck Series for championship. Which, it's difficult to make that kind of prediction. I think with the way the second half of the season went, that he's in prime position to go into next year with a good possibility, a good chance at winning the championship. I watched him last year in the few races that he ran, and in particular the one with Spire. I think it was at IRP, Indianapolis Raceway Park, or whatever it's called now, O'Reilly Raceway Park, the Indianapolis short track, and he finished top. I think he finished third, something like that, and that caught my attention. I became friends with Brad a while back on a Facebook page, Facebook group, sharing NASCAR history and stuff like that, and we struck up friendship, and so through him, and then through that run at IRP, I started paying attention to Layne. And when the season started, I told Brad, I said, look, if Layne can have good luck, I think he's going to have the speed and everything to run up front. And that's what Daytona, I think he qualified first. He may have gotten the pole. He qualified up front at Daytona to start the season, and then got caught up in a wreck that wasn't his fault. It was just a big wreck at Daytona. Daytona and Talladega is like a crapshoot. And he got caught up in a wreck. And I remember his interview. He said, "This is not how our season's going to go. We're going to make this happen." Layne is the kind of guy. His dad is the kind of guy as well, where they're going to make it happen one way or another. They've got the ability, so there's no reason why it shouldn't happen. And Layne proceeded to have, some of the worst luck that I've seen a NASCAR driver have in quite some time. I used Darlington as a good reference. Ran top 5 all night. That's when he was running the throwback to his dad's RC Cola livery from, I think, the late 90s, early 2000s. Layne ran top 5 all night, and they had a restart pretty late into the race, and Dean Thompson lost it in front of him, cleaned out about 5 or 6 trucks, including Layne, and that was basically how the season went. And then Milwaukee rolled around. They had already missed the chase, or the playoffs, and they ended up winning Milwaukee, and then smoked everybody at Bristol the next week. The thing about Layne is if they could get qualifying figured out, and Scott has said this in interviews as well, if they can get qualifying figured out and qualify up front instead of mid-pack, they'd wear everybody out on a weekly basis, just about. But that'll come with time, you know. I think the crew chief, I think most of the crew is pretty new to the game as well. So, but I think going into next year, based on just momentum alone, after winning those 2 races, got the monkey off the back, the bad luck was gone. And even though he got wrecked at Talladega after those 2 wins, but I think he's going to be tough. Now he's got Chandler Smith coming in next year, who's going to be his teammate. And so now you're going to have notes to compare and contrast to from someone else. And Chandler, that dude is stupid fast in anything that he gets in. So, and then when he ran in the Truck Series, I mean, he was quick. And I don't see any reason why that won't be the case now, too. My only concern about next year with those guys is the lawsuit that's going on right now with Front Row and NASCAR. Hopefully it doesn't end up being a distraction from the team as a whole. I know the Truck Series team is not the Cup Series team, but they're still run out of the same shop. So same ownership, Bob Jenkins, Jerry Freeze. It's all the same guys. So I hope that's not the case. I hope that it doesn't distract from them. And I hope that they still have the kind of performance that they had this season, and Layne's going to be tough to handle. But really the main thing, too, as far as forecasting or predicting who's going to be a championship contender, is the championship format is such a way that you really can't make an honest prediction of who's going to be a championship contender, because there's so many stupid things that go into winning a championship now, most of it being luck. You know, yes, you have to run up front, but you have one bad race could derail your entire season. And to me, that's crazy. That's crazy. If you've followed my channel for any amount of time, I've made posts about this. I don't think it's any secret that I cannot stand the championship format that NASCAR has in place right now. I think most people are coming around to that same notion, especially after Logano won the championship in the Cup Series last year. He had no business winning the championship. It's a farce. And so, like, I hear people all the time saying, well, I'm going to make a prediction for the championship next year. Kyle Larson or whatever. Like, Kyle Larson was the best driver all season in 24 in the Cup Series. He didn't even make it to the final round. Which also, that's another pet peeve of mine, by the way. He did make it to the final round because the final round was Phoenix and he was racing in Phoenix. People say all the time that, oh, he's got to win a race here when you're talking about advancing to the Final Four race to actually race for the championship. Well, he has to do this and win there in order to race in Phoenix. Well, no, everyone's racing in Phoenix. They're just racing for championship in Phoenix. Which is another fundamental issue with this Final Four garbage. If you're going to have it, okay. But everyone who's not participating sits at home. Doesn't race. It's the only way to make it even a slight veneer of legitimacy. It's the only way you can achieve that is by telling the rest of the guys who are not participating in the championship that they cannot race. And people say, well, you know, because of sponsorship, stuff like that. Well, you can have that orchestrated in your sponsorship contract before the season starts. We'll give you X amount of money for the entire regular season. And then have a clause that says if you make it into the playoffs, we'll continue to pay you X amount of dollars. If you don't, that's going to be the end of our term for that particular season. That's it. Season's over. And then we'll just pick back up next year or whatever. But I don't know. Like I said, it's just, to me, it's crazy. You got Joey Logano, who should have been 15th in points, ends up winning the championship. I mean, what a joke. It's the same thing happened with Matt Crafton a few years ago in the Truck Series. It didn't win a race and ended up winning the championship. It's just nonsense. Absolute nonsense. It's counterintuitive to what they said that the championship format now is supposed to do. It's supposed to incentivize racing hard for the win. is supposed to reward the best driver. Steve Phelps, I'll never forget this. This was either in 23 or 22. He was interviewed in Phoenix, and they were asking him then, should there be any format changes? And he was like, no, this is the fairest way to reward a champion. Like, what? What are you smoking, dude? That's insane. That is absolutely insane. That's why I'm not holding out a whole lot of hope. I know they're tossing around the idea of changing the format. If they make drastic changes, I will be completely shocked and blown away. And if they're changes for the better and not for the worse, I will be completely shocked and blown away. If they do that, I'll be the first person to admit that I was wrong, and I'll sing their praises. But I don't foresee that happening. Call me crazy. What I see happening is we're still going to have playoffs. We're still going to have elimination rounds and all that kind of thing. Probably have like a final round instead of a final race, which is just crazy. You know, if you're going to have the playoffs, go back to the first term of the playoffs, since it's changed 15 times since they created it in 2004. But from 2004 to whenever they changed it the first time, that was the best version of it, the most legitimate version of it. Not that it was ever legitimate to start with, because it's not, but at least, like I said just a minute ago, it had a veneer of being legitimate, as opposed to now, where now it reminds me of, there's a really bad movie from, I think, the early 2000s with the two guys that made South Park. It's called Basketball. It's not a good movie, but they essentially take basketball, baseball, and there may be other ones I don't really remember, but they mash them up to create a new sport, and they call it basketball. That's what I feel like they've done with NASCAR. You know, they take all these different rules and stuff that they've lifted from other sports, like the Final Four race, and just mash it together to come up with this nonsense. And I don't know, to try to differentiate from other sports, but a lot of the rumor mill was this was created in order to compete with the NFL in the second half of the season, which NASCAR was doing in 2004. That ship has long since sailed. NASCAR is not even coming close to competing with the NFL. And, you know, when you're averaging 2.5, to 3.5 million viewers every weekend, which, don't get me wrong, that's a good number for like 90% of any other motorsport out there. But when you're talking about in 2005, the numbers were about double that. That's a problem. You're not competing with the NFL anymore. It's never going to happen. At least not while the France family's running the show. It's just not. They don't. Brian, I don't know what Brian's mentality was with NASCAR. Obviously he was. I don't know if he was drunk while he was running the show, but that's why he ended up getting ousted, was because he was driving drunk and had drugs in his car. But Jim acts like he doesn't want to have anything to do with it, and it shows in the results. It's almost like the Steves are running the show, and the Steves just care about the bottom dollar, but obviously not enough to change things back to when they were actually making real money. So I don't know. It's almost like I think it was last year or the year before when NASCAR came out and said, hey, we're not going to have stage breaks at road courses moving forward. And then they ran the road course at Indianapolis, and it was like watching paint dry. It's one of the most boring races that I've ever seen. And so after that, they're like, you know what? No, we changed our mind. We're going to bring them back. Like, we're the only series in the world that changes our rules on the fly in the course of a season. In an active season, we're just going to keep changing our rules. God. I could go on for hours about NASCAR and their incompetence and everything. I know I got off subject from talking about Layne, but that's how I feel about that whole thing. You know, I want to be able to sit back with confidence and be like, yeah, I'm going to put money on Layne being a championship contender next year. But if he makes it into the championship race, the playoffs, and then he has a tire failure and hits the fence and doesn't finish a race, well, then he's out of the championship potentially. You know, it's crazy. Like Corey Haim should have been champion already. Which he may be. No, I don't think he's won it yet. But anyways, he should have won. Ty Majeski should not have won last year. That's just a fact. Anyway, got another point that I wanted to bring up. So a lot of people, more people than you think, actually. I mean, I didn't realize there was this many people that actually think this, but there are. Petty Enterprises and Richard Petty Motorsports are not the same thing. That is two completely different teams. Okay? Petty Enterprises closed down after 2008, going in 2009. RPM formed as a result of like mergers with like 5 different teams. I think Robert Yates, Evernham, Petty Enterprises, or Gillette Evernham, excuse me. And so they ended up just taking Richard Petty's name and called it Richard Petty Motorsports. But it's not the same thing. And I think for the majority of its existence, Andrew Murstein was the main owner of the team. Richard was a minority owner and was basically just namesake for the team and the face of the team. And Andrew was the one who actually owned it, and he owns the Medallion Cab Company in New York. I think it's in New York where it's based out of. But it's not the same team. And so when you look back at like the old school Richard Petty video clips and pictures and stuff of that from back then, that was Petty Enterprises. You know, I was a Petty Enterprises fan. Well, I still am, but I was a huge fan of theirs growing up. My grandmother, God rest her soul, she was a massive Richard Petty fan. And when she passed away, she left me so much stuff I didn't even know she had, from back in the 80s and 90s, which is pretty cool, by the way. But so I grew up and I was around her while I was growing up a lot, as much as I was around my parents. And so we'd sit over there on Sundays at her house and watch Saturday and Sunday, because we'd watch the Busch races too. We'd never missed one. And so I remember sitting over there on the couch week after week after week, and we're talking about like 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, that era. And I would start jumping up and down, pulling for John Andretti. You know, he's running 15th at best. You know, every once in a while, John would mess around and get a top 10. Okay, 2001, he had several top 10s. 2002, here and there. But the overwhelming majority of the seasons during that era, it would be mid-pack. And that was the case for all 3 of the Petty cars. But I always gravitated towards John. I don't know if it was the Cheerios thing, you know, because I was a kid, or what it was, but like I loved the way that car looked with the Cheerios liveries, or all the Betty Crocker liveries, when they'd run special schemes like the Grand's livery that they ran at Charlotte, which is the race in 2002 where Todd Bodine it was at Charlotte. Todd Bodine clipped the grass on the front stretch in the dogleg, and it had rained, which, I mean, you don't want. Jeff Green said afterwards in an interview, you don't want to be in the grass regardless of if it's wet or not, which is true. But Todd hit the grass and took out like 10 cars, lost it, hit Ward Burton, bounced off of him, took out all of the Childress cars, and took out John. But anyway, all the Petty cars ran mid-pack for the most part. Kyle Petty had a really good season in 2002, which a lot of people don't remember this and don't know this. 2001 was a hot mess for Kyle Petty. Okay, and it's understandable. I mean, he lost his son in 2000, and he was driving his car in 2001, the car that Adam was supposed to be driving. And 2001, it wasn't just that, though. The engine program was awful. Was awful. Now, I don't remember how many engines Kyle ended up losing that year, but it was several. And then missed a lot of shows. You know, it was too slow during qualifying, which that was a problem for the 44 as well with Buckshot. But in 2002, they came out strong. And, you know, they were running like between 15th and 20th every week. And that's good for them. I think they ended up only having, for Kyle, he only ended up having one top 10. I think it was at Talladega. The race where he actually ended up causing the big wreck at the end, where Tony got pinched up against the wall and Mike Wallace spun out across his nose, big mess. Kyle got pushed out of line and then tried to squeeze back in, and it kind of accordioned up the field and took everybody out. But 2002 was a good year for them. I mean, 2002 was also the year that Buckshot got fired. Finally, I love Buckshot, so don't get me wrong. I'm not saying anything bad about him, but like, he was not gelling with the Petty team. They should have pulled the trigger on getting rid of him sooner. And then they brought in Steve Grissom and Jerry Nadeau, and Jerry almost won at Sonoma. Had the car not broke, which the car broke because he spun out earlier in the race, and I'm assuming that's probably what messed up the rear gear. And then Jerry got hurt in a go-kart wreck later in the season and had to miss the final few races. And they brought in Steve again, but then they also brought in, for 2 races at the end of the year, Greg Biffle. And Greg, he ran Rockingham and Homestead. Rockingham, he qualified either top 10 or close to the top 10, and ran close to the top 10 all day, and I think kind of faded at the end and finished like 25th. At Homestead, Greg qualified top 5. He was top 10, but I'm pretty sure it was top 5. Don't quote me on that. But he ran top 5 for the vast majority of the race until they started having something going on with the carburetor or something like that. He ended up losing a couple of laps. But, you know, back then they had lead cars on restarts line up on the outside, lap down cars line up on the inside, and he started on the inside when he was 2 laps down. And when they restarted, he just took off and left everybody, you know, in a Petty Dodge. So my point being is that the Petty cars, they had the speed, they had the ability to run up front. They just, for whatever reason, other than Greg, they just weren't clicking with the drivers that they had. I don't want to throw any shade on anybody, cast any shade on anybody that was driving those cars back then, but it just didn't gel for whatever reason. And so the team went on for a few more years. 2003, they dropped off dramatically in performance. You know, they scaled the 44 back to part-time and brought in Fittipaldi to drive it in a handful of races. And then the 43 started missing races. Later in the season, they released John, and they brought in Christian, and then they brought in a couple other people throughout the season, Scott Maxwell, Shane Mill. And then the 45 missed a couple of races too. And Kyle said at the time that it was because of Mike Edge engine program. It wasn't very good. I don't know. Shane tried to qualify the 43 at Daytona, I think it was, and he got out of the car and said the transmission had come apart on him. So it's just, I don't know. They just fell off a cliff. 2004 got better. They hired Jeff Green to drive the 43. You know, they got more consistent, making races instead of missing a bunch of them. 2005 was okay. Then they brought in Bobby Labonte in 06, and he drove the 43 until Petty Enterprises went defunct after 2008. And then Kyle started scaling back his career too. I think a lot of that was, if I remember at the time, Boston Ventures had bought into Petty Enterprises, and they were wanting to take Kyle out of the 45 and put in younger guys. And they put in Chad McCumbee. Chad is a hell of a race car driver. I just want to be clear about that. Even to this day, Chad is awesome. But, you know, Petty Enterprises was on its last leg, and I think it was pretty obvious at the time. So, anyways, my point being, okay, is that Petty Enterprises and RPM are not the same thing. I just went down a complete rabbit hole that had nothing to do with that point, but there you go. Anyways, if you found this interesting for whatever reason, just make sure to like, subscribe, turn on notifications, leave comments, share with everyone. And I really appreciate it. You guys and gals are awesome. Your support is awesome. Everyone who watches these videos, this is a passion project of mine. To be clear, I mean, this is not something that I'm doing for monetary gain. This is something that I'm doing because I absolutely love motorsports. It's my life outside of my wife and kids. It is my life. And so I just want to give something back in any shape, form, or fashion that I can, and regardless how big or how little it is. I don't care. I just want to get it out there and share it with the world. So, thanks for watching. You guys are awesome. I'll see you next time. Love you. Peace.